All right. Welcome back to the Just Mets podcast. After a few weeks off, I am still your host, Rich MacLeod, and we are here to officially get things back in gear and kick off what should be honestly one of the most consequential off seasons that the Mets have ever had. If you're watching us here on YouTube, you are going to notice that I'm joined by a very special guest, and that is because we are officially starting a new chapter with this show. Joining me not only today, but every week now as the co-host of the Just Mets podcast is my good friend, Andrew Claudio. You probably know Andrew from Knicks Film School or Mets Therapy. He also joined this very podcast as a guest multiple times this past season. We'll get into all the updates for the show in a second, but before we just jump in, Andrew, welcome.
Thank you, Rich. I'm honored to be here. Sincerely, I am excited for this new chapter, both in my career and in this show. Obviously, gigantic Mets fan. Obviously, live and die with this team, which is why I created a thing called Mets Therapy that allows me to get my thoughts out after every game. And I'm excited to do this pod with you, this show with you, someone who I've gotten to know really well over the past couple of years. And yeah, you said it. This will be an interesting offseason to start doing this for, but excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, super happy to have you. Like, you know, we had you on several times. We almost did a podcast, if we're going behind the scenes, a couple of years back. I think one of the first podcasts I ever joined as a guest was with you maybe a decade ago before we even really knew each other.
Yeah.
So
way back when I was at a thing called Gotham Sports Network.
Yes.
I did a show called, I did a thing called, a show, I should say, not a thing, called Next Stop Willets Point. And I went around to different Mets fans I could find on the internet. This is back in the Skype days before people turned their camera ons to look at each other during podcasts. And little did I know that interview with Rich MacLeod, producer for MLB.com, would eventually be the person that I'd be doing a co-hosting a Mets podcast with in my late 30s. But I believe they call that serendipity,
I think so.
Rich. So we eventually found each other.
Yeah, I'm super glad to have you here. And we do have some updates with the show now that you're coming on. Honestly, the biggest thing, which is the most exciting, is that this weekly show that comes out every Monday morning is now going to be free in full. Before it was under a paywall during the season. So this will now be free on YouTube and all the different podcast apps, starting with this first one. But if you are already a paid subscriber to us on Patreon or on Substack, you're not going to be losing any content. You're actually going to be gaining it, because every Thursday we're going to have an additional bonus podcast where either Andrew or myself has a different guest on, much like what we did during the season. That will be exclusive to Patreon subscribers. If you're a free subscriber, still kind of want us to suss it out, you'll get like a little clip every week of it on the YouTube and in the podcast feed. But that'll be an additional perk for our paid subs. So super excited for that. First one of those is going to be coming out this Thursday morning. I'll be joined by Joe DeMeo, who joined the podcast much earlier this summer. So super excited to talk about the offseason with him. But before we get to that, we have a lot to talk about. And before we even get to the Mets offseason, I feel like now that we're back, we've been off for a few weeks and we're starting this new version of the show, we should probably talk about the World Series that just happened. And I can't believe went as long as it did and ended less than 24 hours ago as we're recording this. Dodgers win. They are back-to-back champions. They win a thrilling Game 7 in 11 innings. Before we get into the details, instant reaction from Andrew Claudio watching that game last night.
So there's really three prevailing thoughts that I end up with. And obviously this being a Mets show and a lot of Mets fans watching this, like we always are going to go to the Mets perspective on all these things. And the first prevailing thought, and I'm sorry to not talk about the Dodgers first, but that's just like the most devastating loss that I've ever seen a team suffer. And I tried to go through all the other devastating playoff losses that I could think of. The best one I could come up with is the Rangers in 2011 blowing Game 6, blowing two 2-run leads in the 9th inning and the 10th inning in Game 6, and then losing in Game 7. And that was rough because they were an out away from winning the World Series, a strike away from winning the World Series twice.
And a defensive substitution potentially away.
Whatever you want to say, he strikes him out. The defensive substitution doesn't matter. But you're right. Like, if they put a better right fielder than Nelson Cruz in right field, then potentially the Rangers win the World Series. Neither of those games were at home, and neither of those games, like Game 7 wasn't close. And so when you talk about the Blue Jays and all the different, like, if this one play goes differently, they win the World Series. And it starts in the 9th inning of Game 6. Barger's line drive getting stuck under the wall, and everybody in Canada saying, we've never seen that. Like, that's not knowing the rule, because that doesn't happen at the Rogers Center. Jimenez with the line drive, old friend Andres Jimenez with the line drive that gets caught by Kike Hernandez. And then the underrated part of this, and obviously Miguel Rojas played a big role in Game 6 and Game 7, but Kike spikes the throw. That gets by, a run scores, and then it's like Barger goes to third base with 2 outs. So who knows where they are. Then you go to last night. You know, like Bichette can't score on the base hit in the first inning because of, or whichever inning it was, because it was the second inning. Bichette can't score, so they get bases loaded and nobody scores in the second inning off Ohtani. They eventually score the 3-run homer by Bichette, so he makes up for it. The line drive that Jimenez hits with a charging Muncy when they thought he was going to bunt, and it just lands in his glove. Then, of course, like the IKF thing where he pinch runs for Bichette. He gets to third base. I don't have as much of an issue with the lead that he didn't take because of what just happened the night before with Barger getting doubled off. And instead, it's more, why did you slide? Like, run through the base. You don't slow down, and you probably are a World Series champion today. And then the Clement fly ball that I still don't know how Andy Paz has caught that ball. That was destined for both of those, like him and Kike colliding into each other, and that inning that leading to a World Series champion. And instead, that's a catch. And then you go to the 11th inning, and if Alejandro Kirk just hits a fly ball or hits a ground ball to the right side, instead of a ground ball perfectly for a 6-6-3 to end it, we're at least in the 12th inning with a tie game. All of those things I would be replaying for the rest of my life if that was the Mets and that happened to them. And both of those games happened at home. And we're in a unique situation as Mets fans that most of the devastating losses in our franchise's history have happened at Citi Field or at Shea Stadium. So I empathize with my brothers to the north in Toronto. That is something you just don't get over, because your season ends on a special season too. Mm-hmm. And there's no like, at least I'll get to say goodbye to them. No, it's just over. And that's just sometimes what happens with sports. It really sucks.
Yeah. I mean, the text message I sent you last night, the second the game ended, was, if this happened to the Mets, you'd never hear from me ever again. Mm-hmm. The Mets have had some devastating losses. 2015 still sits in my chest sometimes. It's not even close to what the Blue Jays and their fans just went through. And yeah, I mean, there's 1,000 individual moments. You'll replay this screenshot of IKF and Will Smith at the plate would just burn in my brain for all time. Mm-hmm. The fact that his foot also comes off home plate and then back on it, and it's like within millimeter. I do think he was out, but there's also part of me that's like, even if he came off, like, are they really going to decide the World Series?
I need more conclusive evidence than that,
And even like you talk about the Pages catch, they only put Pages into center field because he had a better arm than Edman. There's no way Tommy Edman's making that catch. And I don't know if Kike's catching that over the shoulder the way he was running. That's a huge game-changing thing. Vlad swinging 3-0. I thought he got it. I've contact, and it looked like a walk-off home run. I think it was the 9th or the 10th.
That was bottom 9. Yeah, that was right after the Rojas home run to tie it.
And yeah, we didn't even talk about Miguel Rojas of all. It's not like Ohtani or Freeman hit a home run. Like in the moment, it felt like Rajay Davis in 2016, except Cleveland didn't actually win that World Series, and it wound up kind of going into the dustpan. Whereas Miguel Rojas, of all people, who was only in the game because, again, Pages had been so bad that they said, okay, Edman, you're going in center field, and we're just going to play Marlins stalwart Miguel Rojas at second base, and he gets the biggest hit of his entire life. There's just so many different things, and it's devastating. It's like I felt so bad for them immediately in the moment because I just empathize too much with that kind of thing, and I don't know how you get over that unless you go back and win, and that's a really tough thing to do unless you're the Dodgers.
A lot broke right for them, and they got the nickname of the comeback kids, the Blue Jays. And part of that is just I personally like counted them out so many different times throughout the pennant race, like the division race. I thought the Yankees were going to overtake them, especially that last week of the season, and they had to win 5 straight to hold on to a tie for the division that they eventually won the tiebreaker for. When the Yankees won Game 3. I thought the Blue Jays were kind of dead. I thought they woke up a sleeping giant, and then they won Game 4 at the stadium. And then obviously down 2-0 in the NLCS after losing the first 2 at home, and then down 3-2, down 3-1 in the 8th inning in the 8th inning. Yeah. 8th inning or 7th inning?
It was the 8th inning when Springer hit the home run.
Okay. Are we sure it wasn't the 7th inning? I'm now lost.
Pretty sure, but these games, there's been so many of these games.
Longest World Series of all time, too. So we're all kind of baseball. These innings run together. Literally. Regardless, down late in Game 7 at home against the Mariners, and they come back and win. Down 2-1 after a devastating 18-inning loss in Game 3 after the Ohtani show happens in the World Series. And then, like, after losing Game 6 the way they do, they have a lead, and it's like every single time I think the Blue Jays are gonna roll over and die, they come back and win. And for the way this season ends to be a Dodger comeback and win, where the Jeff Hoffman 92% chance to win, probability on the charts for the Dodgers to lose, at least. I would never. I would be so long before I watch baseball again. And I know you mentioned the 2015 World Series. Imagine if the way they lost Game 4 and 5 was Game 6 and 7 with the Mets having a 3-2 lead in the series. That's honestly the only equivalent you have to what it could be. So yeah, I empathize with Dodger fans. The second thing is the Dodger angle of this. I said I empathize with Dodger fans. I empathize with Blue Jays fans. I don't really care about Dodger fans today.
No.
The Dodger angle of this. 2 stats for you. So 87 qualified hitters in the playoffs. 87 different qualified postseason batters. The Dodgers had 1 player in the top 25 in OPS, and it was Ohtani. The next closest was 26 and 27. Teoscar Hernandez and Will Smith. Everybody else just didn't hit in the postseason. They really won this World Series on the back of Ohtani and a starting pitching staff that with the best money could buy between Yamamoto and Snell and Glasnow and Ohtani. It kind of, and this is where we also have to go to the Mets angle. We're eventually going to talk about how much pitching the Mets are going to need to pretend they're a World Series contender next year. And this really showed that people can talk about the offense, and I'm sure we'll talk about the offense at some point, but they just won the World Series with really 1 hitter being consistently great from a value standpoint. And then the other stat is that they finished with a 233 collective average, which is the 100th best of all the World Series winners of the modern era. Now, to be clear, it's the same batting average as the 2016 Cubs, the 2022 Astros, who went through offensive funks throughout their World Series runs. But if you remember, those teams had some great pitching too. So it just goes to the old modicum that pitching wins championships, was just highlights. What Yamamoto did just gets a gigantic WTF for me. Rich, were you watching baseball in 2001?
Not really.
So you don't remember Randy Johnson coming in the ninth inning of Game 7? So Randy Johnson throws a complete game in Game 6 for the Diamondbacks. They go down 3-2 in Game 7 to the Yankees, and he comes in the eighth inning, throws 17 pitches, gets 4 batters out. It was looked at as like a great effort, but it wasn't looked at as this great feat that he did. It was just looked at as like Randy Johnson came in and got four batters. There was no leverage to it. What Yamamoto did last night, getting the final 8 outs of the game, coming in and getting out of the jam in the 9th inning, getting out of the jam in the 11th inning, the night after he threw 7 scoreless or 7 innings of 1-run ball. It's one of the more impressive things I've ever seen
in this era of baseball. Especially.
Yes, in this era of baseball, for sure.
It's a 0 day. When I saw him warming up, I was at a Halloween party. We were all like had our hands on our heads, like, he's warming up. What are you talking about? And then he comes in and he did get lucky in the 9th, but after that, he really just shut it down. And it's amazing. You go back to the Mets really tried to get him, and now you kind of know why. There was not much they could do a couple off seasons ago, because I think Martino had posted it on Sunday right after the World Series that like the second that the Dodgers were in on him, like he was never coming to the Mets or the Yankees. He wanted to go to the West Coast. So they couldn't really top those offers. So, it's like one of the first thoughts that I had, of course, like you said, we're Mets fans, so we always bring it back to the Mets. And it was just like, man, what would I feel if the Mets lost this World Series? And damn, I wish Yoshinobu Yamamoto was on the Mets right now. But yeah, one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. And honestly, I was not rooting for the Dodgers to win. I think it would have been more fun and more interesting for the Blue Jays to do it. My hot take, and I don't know how hot of a take this is it might be like 2% better for the Mets that the Dodgers don't come into an offseason coming off of a loss where they'd be angrily spending. Doesn't mean they're not going to spend. They might still get like a Kyle Tucker or something like that. But I don't know. I do think that there's a little bit something to the Dodgers might not go as hog wild because they've won back-to-back versus had they lost in like pretty embarrassing fashion.
Yeah, I'd rather the Dodgers. Now, they might still go hog wild anyway because of the Dodgers, but I'd rather them be just be coming off a championship. Now, it also, hopefully, them being high spenders. I did not need the narrative out there that you don't need to spend to win a World Series. And especially in an offseason where I really hope the Mets spend some money, including the fact that I don't know that there's going to be a 2027 baseball season. The last thing, and it's more of a question for you, was this the best World Series you've ever watched, Rich MacLeod?
Oh, man. There's some good contenders in recent years. 2016 is pretty epic, in my opinion. I think this is right there. It's right up there with that. I think 2016 also has the rain delay, the comebacks, the down 3-1 thing, and obviously the Cubs ending the curse. I think I'm going to probably still give that one the slight edge. 2017 was also, people don't talk about it as much. Obviously, that's now known as the Astros cheating World Series. There were some amazing games in that World Series. I think that one doesn't quite live up because Game 7 was just kind of like a little bit boring. They kind of went handily on the road after some insane. Wasn't there like a 13-12 game in there in Houston that year.
It's the iconic Game 5 that had a ton of lead changes, and so the tough part again about 2017 is what we now know was going on in the Houston dugout. So I don't hold that to this level. I think it's probably between this year and 2016, at least in these last few years. Again, you can put that Cardinals Rangers one in. But again, you got to have a good Game 7 to really put it at the top. And you had talked about it earlier. Game 6 was amazing. That's one of the best baseball games I've ever watched in my life. Game 7 kind of sucked. Yeah. That was, again, just a little bit of a romp by the Cardinals. It was mostly never in doubt after the 3rd or 4th inning. So
Those would be my two. I know your baseball fandom goes back a little bit further than me. I'm curious, 2001 has to be up there, and a little bit too old for us, but 1990,
97. The Marlins Indians one.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I only have two more to add to the list. And it's 97 and 01. And as a New Yorker, 2001 meant something so much more than like Yankees Diamondbacks. I think the way, like you mentioned about needing a good Game 7 was outstanding.
Yeah.
What people forget is like Game 1 was a blowout. Game 6 was a gigantic blowout. Like Brenly put all of his right-handers in against Andy Pettitte in Game 6, and that we knew in the third inning there's going to be a Game 7 tomorrow, and it was Schilling against Clemens. It was potentially going to be Roger Clemens' last game. He had just won the Cy. He was going to win the Cy Young. Started that season 20-1. So it was like it had the epic storytelling, and then ends in the bottom of the ninth inning on a walk off. Right. The 2016 World Series is the only thing I think I could put above this one, to your point, because of the history that was involved. Unfortunately, it's just the low profile of the Marlins. It's just tough for me to put like the Marlins winning their first title. It was a great series though, and that obviously was like a similar to this one, a comeback in the bottom of the ninth inning, or a comeback in the ninth inning by the Marlins to tie it, and then they walk it off, and that there's like there was a bad, right? Yeah, there's Edgar Renteria. There's a bad error right before the Renteria walk off though, so there's like so many. It would be like if Ernie Clement's game fly ball was dropped, and that's how the World Series ended. Like you're like, oh man, really? It ends on an error, so that sucks.
Well, yeah. The Miguel Rojas play at the plate. Remember, he almost fell down and screwed it. I thought he did as it was happening live. So I guess it would have been like that if he spikes the ball or just falls on his ass.
Well, add to it. It'd be like if because Will Smith's foot came slightly up. So I'll say this about last night that you didn't mention either. We were this close to two very unreal things happening that would have just been suspended in time. We were this close to a replay review deciding the World Series, because they would have reviewed it, and if his foot is up and IKF crosses the plate, after review, the ruling on the field is overturned. The Blue Jays win the World Series. Would have been surreal. Then there's one other thing. Did you see who was warming up when Alejandro Kirk was at the plate?
Clayton Kershaw.
So Clayton Kershaw retired after this game. If Kirk simply strikes out, Dalton Varsho's up. And I'm 99% sure. I don't know if Dave Roberts has answered a question about it yet. I'm 99% sure that Clayton Kershaw would have come in to face Dalton Varsho with first and third and 2 outs and the World Series on the line, to potentially the last batter of his career.
That's interesting. I had interpreted it as if this game gets tied and we go to the 12th and the Dodgers don't take the lead and they're going to need bulk innings, it was going to be Kershaw, because they had Kershaw and Sasaki warming up. So I'm like, Kershaw's the long guy. Sasaki's if they take the lead again. And I figured Yamamoto was going to get to finish that last inning, but
they were up. Oh, you're saying they would have had Sasaki come into that inning if it was still 5-4.
I think if Yamamoto gives up like a fly ball tie game and then gets the third out, I think it would have been one of Kershaw if the game is tied after that, after the Dodgers bat, or Sasaki if they take the lead. That was my interpretation, but I don't know if Roberts talked about it after the game or not, but that would be very interesting. But instead, Kershaw just gets this kind of like, I was here ring.
Group project, baby. He's able to say he was part of the group project that won back-to-back World Series. I'm choosing to believe that he was warming up to face Dalton Varsho, and that the double play is the only reason we didn't get Clayton Kershaw for the last batter of his career, potentially, Because for all we know, he gives up a home run, and that's how his career ends, which have actually been a fitting end to Clayton Kershaw's postseason resume.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, iconic World Series, longest in baseball history. One we'll never forget, and unfortunately, one for Blue Jays fans that you're gonna really try hard to, but probably never will.
Yeah, and one thing that I thought watching it as we kind of naturally transition here is how far the 2025 Mets were from being able to compete with teams like that. I think there's a handful of people who are like, well, if they got in, you never know. But if you watch the playoffs, like there was no way that this version of this Mets team was going to be able to compete with a lot of these teams, in my opinion. And they would have had to face the Dodgers first. So I don't think that would have gone particularly well. And that kind of leads us into the bulk of what this episode is going to be. These are the top 5 biggest questions for the Mets entering the offseason. We're going to start with a couple of honorable mentions here, but then go through, some of these big questions, because this is a huge offseason for this team. And I also just think a lot of different things can happen here. There's not that many hugely obvious routes that they can take. And I think that makes it really interesting. Also makes it a little bit anxiety inducing because you have no idea where this is going to go. And I'm going to see if I can pull up this first one, which is one of our 3 honorable mentions that we have to start with. This first one was one of mine. And I just want to know, what is the state of the Mets relationship with Kodai Senga? This has been a weird thing that I think has been going on for the last couple of years, especially since David Stearns came in. Senga obviously barely pitches in 2024 and then has a very, very strange year this year where he starts off amazing. He's kind of like a Cy Young contender with a sub 1.5 ERA for the first few months. Then he gets hurt. We don't see him for a while. He comes back, and then we all know the story after that. He's very bad. Says that there's nothing wrong with him. They send him to the minor leagues. He actually agrees. They never really bring him back. And towards the end of the season, we had, Carlos Mendoza and David Stearns surprisingly honest about it, where they were kind of ripping on him a little bit in a way that they don't really do with any of their other players. I remember he threw a bullpen in that final series going into Miami, and Mendoza was like, yeah, like it was okay. Like, I don't know. Not very supportive. And then Stearns's comments in the postseason press conference they did that following Monday again was really not committal at all to him being a part of this team or the part of the solution. I talked to Tim Britton in the week after that they collapsed, and he also thought like this relationship just seems like it might be a little bit strained and that they're not on the same page with each other. And I kind of go into 2026 thinking, is Senga even going to be on this team? What do you think about that?
I think David Stearns made it very clear that he does not. I mean, he literally said it. Like, would I count on Kodai Senga to be healthy and make 30 starts? No, like you can't do that. Now, the trade partner that you would need to find that, and this is where I'm curious how desperate the Mets are to get him off the team. Yeah, I don't know if they're willing to eat a lot of money. Like, is there another contract that a team is willing to move off for 1 year that wants to take a flyer on a guy that had a 1.37 ERA before Pete Alonso threw a ball awry in mid June? Are they willing to take a chance on that? I think you worded this correctly, that it's the relationship with Kodai Senga and the Mets, because I think the organization grew visibly frustrated, both in the media and then just like watching how frustrated the Mets got, and Mendoza's press conferences, the word non-competitive being used in multiple descriptors of Kodai Senga starts. I personally would, if you can get a good trade for him, do it. But I think it's worth taking the flyer on if you can keep him around and you have the high ceiling of him coming back. But I think David Stearns said it right. He can't just be like, okay, he's our number 2. next to Nolan McLean next year. Like he's your 5 that may end up being your 2, but also may end up not being on the roster when you need him the most. It's definitely a wild card.
Yeah, it makes me think of like later stage career Johan Santana, where you kind of had to act like he wasn't even on the team anymore because he got hurt so often. One thing I would say about this is I don't think the Mets are just going to give him away. If there's really zero market for him, I think they'll try to work it out and just rely on him a little bit less. But Kodai Senga is a starting pitcher with, yes, a lot of particularities and issues these last couple of years, but has a very high upside, as we have seen even as recently as this year. He's only making $15 million a year for the next 2 years. That is less than what Frankie Montas signed for. That is less for what a lot of 4 or 5 starters get in the market these days. I think you could talk me into there being a team out there who's like, hey, this is a pretty worthwhile flyer to take for a guy that I'm going to get them for 2 years. It's still kind of below market value for his upside. And honestly, it's a little bit below market value, even for like a middle of the rotation starter at this stage of the game. And if you don't have to give up top prospects, I could see there being something there. Will there be a team like that? I don't know, but I don't think it's as far-fetched as maybe it might seem off the jump. So that's going to be one thing I'm definitely going to be looking at. Let's move to the next one, which is, this is one that you had put in. What exactly is the plan here at DH?
So obviously this translates to one of the other questions that ended up being one of the biggest questions, not an honorable mention. Mm-hmm. But as of right now, I see they have a DH, a full-time DH in my mind in Mark Vientos. That's how they should view him, as he's a guy that doesn't play the field. He does not have a position. No, he is not a third baseman. He was able to hit his way into being good enough to play him at third base during the 2024 run. But what Brett Baty was as a defender and then just as like a solid 7 hitter last year told me he should be the everyday third baseman. That series in Philadelphia really crystallized that too, where they lost 4 straight. And because there was a lefty on the mound for 3 of the 4 games, Mendoza was afraid to play Brett Baty. And how many balls to third base was I just like, oh, Vientos is there. I have to sweat this out. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they have 1 DH there. I hate to just get out in front of on our first episode together, Rich, and just say this, but they have a DH playing right field right now. And I think Soto can be passable if you scheme and scout around him, like put him in the right positions from a defensive placement standpoint. But you basically need like the fastest center fielder of all time that covers so much ground that it doesn't matter how little range Juan Soto has. Or you need to start putting some time at DH for him. And then, of course, there's the Pete Alonso question, the guy who will be a DH probably for the back half of his 30s. So I'm also curious, it's not who will be the DH next year, but what's the plan? Do you see Vientos as a DH? Are you going to go and aggressively after a Schwarber or potentially bring Pete back? It's just all part of what the plan is for DH.
Yeah, and I think that's very well said. It's just like, what philosophy do they have with this position? And since the DH came to stay in 2021, or was that 2022? It came back for good.
No, 22. You're right.
You know, the Mets have kind of mostly operated with it as a bit of a platoon situation. We've seen different teams do different things there. The Mets have largely chosen that flexibility versus like more of a full-time DH, which would be a Schwarber type. Are they going to continue to do that? You know, this is, again, just going to be David Stearns' 3rd year here, and they've got some people coming off the books now where they could change that philosophy if they want to, and they have a viable option or 2 in the free agent market to be that full-time DH. Is that the direction they want to go? Or is it, we bring Pete back, and we're going to talk about Pete in a little bit, and he eventually takes a lot of that spot? Or again, is this just going to continue to be more of like a revolving door situation where we can put Soto at DH for 30, 40 games. We can put Pete there. We can put if Vientos is still going to be here, we can put him there, or a Mauricio, or one of these other guys, somebody else maybe that they sign, and just kind of everybody takes turns at DH. Same thing for Brandon Nimmo. We don't really talk about how bad of an outfielder he's become, and they're stuck with him. You will notice there's no questions about Brandon Nimmo here because they're stuck with him. They can't get rid of him. He makes too much money, signed for too many years, and he has a no trade, so he's going to be here. That's another guy. So I'll be curious to see, what the philosophy is there. I don't think Jesse Winker's coming back. I'll tell you that much.
I don't think they should or will platoon next year, but I am curious what they consider is their best path. Because look, if they trade Vientos, bring Pete back, and it's like Soto's our DH against righties, Pete's our DH against lefties, and you go out and get aggressive with. I honestly don't even know the player yet. We'll throughout this offseason kind of go to free agent targets and who we should go to, but go bolster your defense in either position, first base or right field, and just kind of scheme it that way. I just don't think you could have your entire right field line be as much of a liability as it was last year between Pete and Soto. It's a straight line that anything to the right side is just an extra base factory, like an extra base machine for opposing teams.
Yeah. Speaking of that right field line, Antoine Richardson's not coming back. That's something that's happened in the last month since we did our last podcast. And I think most Met fans are pretty upset about it. I think you and I are pretty peeved about it as well. It sounds like, from what the breadcrumbs, Andy Martino's trying to leave, and we'll see if that winds up being true. Grain of salt, obviously, with Andy sometimes, that maybe Antoine Richardson wants to go somewhere else and work with somebody who's going to get a managerial job somewhere. I think Baltimore was the rumored spot for him. As of us recording this, I don't believe he has been hired anywhere yet, but he's gone. He transformed the Mets running game. He made Juan freaking Soto almost a 40-40 player. I think more than any positional coach we've seen in several years, he's made a massive impact, and the Mets are going to be without that now. This was another one that you put in there, but is that departure going to be a significant loss for this team?
Yeah, it's not who will replace Antoine Richardson. It's, will it be a significant loss? Will the fact that, honestly, the best running game I've ever seen the Mets have existed last year, will the fact that the first base coach is no longer there, and Soto and a lot of people have given him a lot of credit for how good the running game was, and I forget which person really profiled this, of how good he is at picking up on pitchers' tells that, like, this is him going to the plate, and those running or those walking leads that Mets runners would get last year. Because look, the Mets were one of the slowest teams in baseball last year, and they had an 89.1 success rate. Rich, you know how many teams in baseball history have had an 89.1 or higher stolen base rate?
None.
6, and it's teams in the 40s and 30s that stole like 20 to 40 bases a season. And then the 2020 Oakland Athletics, who had an 89.7 successful steals rate during a 60-game season. So the Mets are like the only team, when you go on the list on StatHead, of teams with that highest successful steals rate that had over 100 stolen bases, and it was 147 stolen bases. And they did it with like the slowest roster in baseball, and not really like anybody that was a self-proclaimed base stealer. Again, Juan Soto leading the National League in stolen bases is not something I was expecting going into this season. So that's why it's an honorable mention, because I started off being very annoyed that he wasn't brought back. And then the tea leaves, and the Martino tea leaves, and then just some of the reporting that's out there, I actually don't blame him if he's like, you just fired the entire staff. Mendoza might not be here by June if the team gets off to a bad start. And I don't think I'm in the running to be the head coach of the team or the manager next up. So I think he wanted to go to a place with a little more job security, maybe with somebody that he's worked a little more closely. And I don't think, it doesn't sound like, which would have been the thing that bothered me the most, this came down to money. It doesn't seem like Steve Cohen was like, there's a dollar amount I won't go to with my first base coach. It looks like he's just looking for a little more job security, which in that case, by all means, man, go find that elsewhere. But I am very curious. What will the Mets running game look like next year with this stolen base wizard that existed in the organization last year?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Mets didn't have a runner thrown out at second base by a catcher after May. Yeah, there was a few times late in the year they started getting picked off a little bit more. They got thrown out at third a couple times, but still, it was like 100 and something straight steals of second base without getting thrown out by a catcher, which is pretty insane. And like you said, it's very important to remember this is such a slow station to station type of team, which is why their offense would get in trouble some of the times of needing many hits to get through an inning and score a few runs. And that running game stole a lot of extra runs for an offense that was very hot and cold this past year. So I think this is a really good honorable mention, and I'll be very curious to see what happens.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to get into the actual 5 biggest questions here. We're going to be counting down up from number 5 to number 1. I ordered these, so I'm curious if you will agree with the top couple here. But number 5 is, what is the plan for the young infielders? And we're talking about the young infielders here. This is the quartet of Brett Baty, Mark Vientos, Ronnie Mauricio, and Luis Angel Acuna. I was surprised that all 4 of them made it past the trade deadline this year. I honestly kind of couldn't believe that at least one of them didn't get dealt. But there is no chance. I will put my entire reputation, whatever that means to anybody, on the line here and say there is no way in hell that all 4 of these infielders are going to be on the Mets when spring training starts. Who is staying? Who is going? How many of them? Is it just one of them gets traded? Do 2, maybe even 3 of them get dealt? I'm very curious to see which players they value here. I think Brett Baty is the safest of the 4. I think he probably is the starting third baseman on opening day. Outside of that, though, I think you could make the argument for any of these other 3 to get moved in deals.
So my thought on this is, first, yes, this is the 5th most important, just because of where these guys rank on the most important things on the roster. I think we just watched the World Series where your 25th and 26th men matter. You could argue the Dodgers' 25th man just tied the World Series in the 9th inning with Miguel Rojas. I would agree with you that Brett Baty's the safest. Of the 4, I think Brett Baty's the only everyday player. Mark Vientos is potentially an everyday hitter if he has a better, if 2024 was real and August 2025 was real, then Mark Vientos is an everyday DH. Like, there is a spot for him. I actually would only object to you calling him an infielder. I don't think he is an infielder, but it's not like the way you phrased it. It's just like, I hope the Mets also agree that he's not an infielder. I don't know that Luis Angel Acuna is a major leaguer just yet. And then biggest wild card is Ronnie Mauricio. I think the fact that he came back from such a significant injury, and then the Mets just decided he only had one option left, and they decided they didn't want to use it to send him down and give him at bats because they didn't want to lose his potential spot in the majors. So he was just kind of on ice, and then suddenly playing like 2 of the most important games of the season in the last weekend of the season. He's a wild card. So I could be convinced like you shouldn't give up on a kid like that. I also don't want him. You can't really factor him as part of the big plans on a team with championship aspirations next year. So it's definitely a big question of who stays and who goes, and what is the plan for these young players, albeit designated as infielders right now.
Yeah, I think on merit, you would argue that Acuna and Vientos, if you had to pick 2 of the 4 to ship out, should get shipped out. I just think Acuna's value is so low externally, you might as well keep him around for the defense and the speed. I think Vientos is very, very likely to be gone. I think the fact that they benched him in the most important games for an ice cold Mauricio, to me, was like, we're done here kind of thing. And I think, Vientos was kind of vocal a little bit throughout the season. He was really frustrated with his playing time too. And it could be a similar thing with the Senga thing of like, maybe this relationship has kind of run its course and Vientos is going to wind up being an everyday player for the White Sox, or maybe I could see a lower tier NL East team even if there's a match there. And then Mauricio, yeah, that's the wild card. Is he tantalizing enough that you could include him in a trade package for something more appealing? Maybe something we'll get to in a little bit. And you can give him up instead of an extra top prospect or another major league piece that you would rather keep around. I could see that being something that happens and making the case for why that would make sense. Again, like, are you going to give Acuna away for basically nothing? Probably not, unless, you know, somebody values him as like the third or fourth piece in a trade for something bigger. But I think he probably sticks around just for those reasons.
I don't think you just get rid of him to get rid of him. I agree. Yeah. I think the next most important question connects to Mark Vientos. So I think this is your natural transition to number 4.
Number 4, who's playing center field?
So I have a question for you. If they do the Vientos for Luis Robert trade last year, Luis Robert finished, I believe, number 7 in all of baseball in outs above average for center field last season. Mm-hmm. Do the Mets make the playoffs, potentially stay in the division race? Obviously, the Harrison Bader conversation will forever annoy me that the Mets had a guy that was in-house a year before and didn't like outbid the Phillies for what wasn't a significant prospect package to bring him back in. And then like you could argue Harrison Bader flipped the division race. If they go out and get a center fielder that could field and potentially hit a little bit better than Cedric Mullins, do the Mets, like, are the Mets playing the Dodgers in the honorary get bounced in the wild card round series?
It's a tough question because they only missed the playoffs by virtue of a tiebreaker, so any tiny thing could have made an impact there.
So then is the question more, are they the 5 seed? Like, are they in Chicago?
No.
Instead. Okay.
No. You know, we'll put aside that Robert got hurt. You know, maybe it's a butterfly effect thing. If he comes here, the same thing doesn't happen to him. I don't think he would have been that big of an impact to get the Mets to that point. And as bad as Vientos was, and Vientos was mostly bad last year, and he was pretty stinky in September. He did kind of carry them offensively for about 4 weeks in a pretty major way. I think there was an impact there that helped them in this playoff race. Again, does it net out to the whole year of him being positive as an impact? No. But if we're just talking about like August 1st through the end of September, his offense in that period of time did have a positive impact. And I don't know if enough would have been different for the Mets to go from losing out to not having to play the Dodgers and being the second wild card team. I can't see that having been a possibility. You know, they would have already had Luis Robert under control for 2026. I guess that's a positive. Whereas if you want to get him, you have to probably give up a little bit more now because he did finish the year strong before he got hurt. But yeah, I don't personally think it would have made that level of an impact.
So counterpoint, because I know what Vientos was from August. You're going to say August 1st until the end of September?
Just post trade deadline. I'm talking about. He wasn't that good for that long. It was more of like a 3 to 4 week spurt for him. I have the range. It's exactly 28 games.
It's from that grand slam he hit in San Diego, where a game they eventually lost, but it was a grand slam that he hit in San Diego, I think 2 days before the trade deadline. And then the home run he hit in Cincinnati, I was on a Sunday, I believe. And they ended up losing that game, which ended up losing them the tiebreaker. But it was a David Peterson special. It was either the Cincinnati game. Oh, no. It was the Friday night game that Acuna got the saved the day after Diaz had the Houdini act. Diaz got out of a bases loaded, nobody out jam, and the Mets ended up winning. That's a 117 at bat sample that Mark Vientos had a 983 OPS. the Mets had one of their best months in team history offensively in August. So it was like everybody was hitting. I know he contributed to that. He had 10 home runs, about 30 RBIs during that stretch. The Mets went 11-17 while Mark Vientos was hitting the cover off the ball. You know what they could have used? A DH, a center fielder potentially that wasn't Cedric Mullins, and then you piece together your DH at bats with somebody else. Maybe they go out and trade for a DH instead of Vientos. Now, I would have been very annoyed if he's in Chicago hitting the cover off the ball for sure. But if I had a center fielder that wasn't Cedric Mullins and a ball over any ball over his head wasn't significantly being outjudged, and he maybe had an arm that was a little bit better. It's why it's one of the biggest questions for me. Is that trade still available to go get? Do you want to stick with Tyrone Taylor? And then if Benj is the future, you call him up when he's ready and just hand the keys over. The plan for DH that I mentioned with Soto potentially playing some days at DH. If you have Robert on the team, can you still call up Benj? And then on certain days, Soto DHs and both of them play your outfield. Look, Mr. Run Prevention, David Stearns, the way you can prevent runs is by bolstering your defense. And I think getting a center fielder that isn't such a negative on offense or a neutral on offense is one of the priorities for the offseason.
So are you saying that you don't want to re-sign Cedric Mullins?
I am indeed saying that not only do I not want to sign Cedric Mullins, I don't want to sign anyone named Cedric or has the last name Mullins ever again. I see a Mullins on the back of a Mets jersey, I will be triggered to the 2 months that I was privy to watching Cedric Mullins play for the Mets.
Yeah, well, let's move to a more liked Met that is now a free agent. Pete Alonso, but more broadly, question number 3, what is the plan similarly to the DH for first base? Is this a Pete Alonso? Is this what the Yankees did with Soto of trying to replace Pete Alonso in the aggregate offensively and improve their defense? Before we even get super deep into this, I want to get your thoughts first.
I will understand if a team offers Pete Alonso a bad contract, if the Mets say we're not going to give Pete Alonso a bad contract. What do I mean by that? If a team like the Anaheim Angels of Los Angeles, right? If they decide to give Pete 7 years, $200 million, Pete, you were a great Met. I loved watching you compete for this team. One of the best power hitters in team history. Go enjoy Anaheim. You earned it. If it's a comparable deal, like a 5-year deal, even a 5+1, that the Mets could very, very clearly get in on this, but David Stearns only wants to give like 3 or 4, then I'll be a little frustrated. And if he signs like 4 years anywhere, I'm just going to be like very pissed off at this organization, because I think Pete Alonso has at least 3, if not 4, if not 5 good years as a hitter left in his career. The National League has a DH now. And so if you want to limit how many games he's still playing at first base, fine. But Pete Alonso is the second biggest question mark for me as far as whether he's still a Met in the future. And if it's not him, then who? And there are first basemen out there. They're not flashy or sexy names out there, but there are first basemen out there that are better defensively and nothing offensively. So I'm very curious. Spoke a lot about run prevention in your closing press conference, Mr. Stearns. What's the plan at first base?
Yeah, I think this one's really interesting, and I think we'll get in a minute to why this isn't number one. I think there's some people who might be like, how is Pete Alonso not the number one thing? And we'll get to that. I think the reason why it's not so high is that there are some options that are not the most disgusting. I think all of our preference is to keep Pete Alonso. I would like to see him here. I just want to see more guys who play their whole careers here, just like as a fan, honestly. And he's one of those guys that just deserves it. Everybody loves it. You know, people get on him, but people got on David Wright. People will whitewash the fact that they didn't ever yell at David Wright for swinging at a slider low and away. Like, People got on David Wright all the time. People hated Carlos Beltran. It's the way it goes. And then they retire and then you forget all that stuff. And Pete's no different there. So I would like to see him finish his career here. But look, if you're telling me, and again, we're going to get more deep into all the options as the offseason goes on. We have several months of content to make here. So we'll have some time for that. But, let's say Ryan O'Hearn's the first baseman. I don't know what his defensive metrics are. I'm just throwing him out there as a right-handed option. You get Ryan O'Hearn, who hit really, really well for the Padres after the trade deadline. He plays first base. And then you get a Schwarber to play DH. You're not bringing in two lefties. That was a conversation you and I had off the mics of like, well, Naylor and Schwarber would be pretty cool, but you add two lefties to a very left-handed lineup already, and you lose your big righty bopper. So that's probably not the most ideal situation, but you have some options there. If that is the pivot, I think something like that I could be down for. If we're more talking about like Ty France and Josh Naylor, then like, no, I'm going to be pissed. So there's definitely a line here, and it's going to be really interesting to see. And I think the one big thing here that's going to have to be different than last offseason, I think it will be, is the Mets cannot afford to wait until January to do this. Last year, they largely held on to Mark Vientos when his value was decently high, at least for him, because they weren't sure what was going to happen with Pete. And then they wound up missing the boat to trade him. This was something that I think John Morosi talked about. And now they're going to have to get rid of him for a lot less this offseason because of that. They can't afford to do that again. They need to be able to pivot quickly while the options are still available. It's like last year, maybe they could have gone and got Christian Walker if they made the Alonso decision earlier and they let him walk. And I think that what they did wound up being better, but they can't afford to get in a situation where they start running out of options and then Pete leaves, because then you get in big trouble and the fans are going to be pissed.
You add in, like, look, Ryan O'Hearn's an interesting name for sure. That is a run prevention name. That is a strong defensive first baseman. I think the offensive options out there, and it's why, like, again, you just said it, what we talked about, there's so many just left-handed options, like the Josh Naylors, like say what you want. Cody Bellinger is an option if you want the Mets to pivot and potentially ruin the Yankees' chance of re-signing him, right? It would be very weird if the Mets, in back-to-back off seasons, their big free agent acquisition is a Yankee outfielder. But like to the point I mentioned earlier, if you want to give Soto some games at DH and bolster your defense, and then Pete some games at DH, you sign both Pete and Cody Bellinger, but that may be wishful thinking. Cody Bellinger could play first base and right field if you wanted to, or just the outfield in general. Yeah. But he's a lefty, and I don't personally care about the Juan Soto dispelled the myth to me of the Yankee Stadium right field being now he may be a generational hitter that it doesn't matter, but I don't think Cody Bellinger will be bad if the Mets get him and his numbers will officially go back down because he doesn't have the short porch anymore. Look, there's not a lot of right-handed options that I'm in favor of for the Mets pivoting from. So to your point, if it's January and he's still not signed, and you have a chance to bring Pete Alonso back for 5 years, go get him. This can't be we have Vientos to play first base plan, though. It just cannot. You cannot go into next season and it's like, we have Beatty and Vientos and Ryan Clifford coming up soon,
Yeah, and that was the one thing I was going to add is, like, I like Ryan Clifford. I think he could be a good player for this team, but like that can't be the plan going in. Is Clifford's the first baseman? Like, that's a lot of... It's adding too many ifs on the roster unless they did big unexpectedly somewhere else.
To that point, real quick, if it is your plan, you then have to be right. You have to be right that Clifford's the plan. And even then, like, Pete could come back and then like Clifford can be called up and then one's your DH, which again answers a question from previously. I can't go into it what is going to be a gigantic season with that as that big an if in the middle of your lineup. It's less of a first base question and more of a cleanup question for me.
Yeah. The only justification for it would be Kyle Schwarber's your DH and maybe you surprised people and got a third baseman and Brett Beatty's playing second base now. I don't think they're going to do that, but that's the only way I could probably live with it is like, oh, we got Bregman and Schwarber. It's not going to happen.
You suddenly got really old with that configuration, and Bregman like broke down at the end of last season.
A little bit.
So, yeah,
it's not ideal, but just re-sign Pete. How about that? Just
there. You go. Just re-sign Pete Alonso. The guy never doesn't play. Just re-sign Pete Alonso.
It's much more simple. This one I think is also really simple. Number 2, and you'll see why this is ahead of Pete by a notch. Who's the closer going to be next year? Because if it's Edwin Diaz, I have no idea who the closer is going to be of this baseball team.
Oh, come on. Brooks Raley is going to be your closer next year. That's one of the good moves that
Ryan Stanek back.
Ryan Stanek played the entire season somehow.
He led the Mets in relief appearances, by the way. That's a pretty unbelievable stat, but
yeah,
he's gone.
So just looking at the free agent reliever list, it's slim pickings. Like, I would argue the second best reliever available is David Robertson. And that's a guy that was waiting out there for months, right? And just decided to go because he probably lived in Pennsylvania. Just say, oh, sure, I'll go play for the Phillies for a month and a half. Why not?
One thing on that is I listened to Dave Dombrowski's postseason press conference a few days after the Phillies got eliminated. He basically straight up said, it was a very weird press conference, by the way, if you want to check it out. He said some strange things for a GM to say. He basically said David Robertson doesn't really want to play the first half of the seasons anymore at his age. So I would take that off the table already. I thought you were going to say Ryan Helsley, which...
Well, that's the funny part about, like, in theory, the second best closer by resume is Ryan Helsley, who did finish strong once he changed his mechanics. Not that any of the innings that he threw were any hint of leverage. There's the gap between Diaz and the second best reliever, let alone closer option. And I understand why this isn't number 1, because I just watched a World Series in which the Dodgers called up the guy that was going to be their closer in late September in Roki Sasaki, and like he just suddenly became the closer and then wasn't the closer for the majority of the World Series. The 3 of the 4 games that they won, the final out was by one of their starting pitchers. Yep. Now, granted, when you have a Yamamoto on your team, it kind of changes all calculations, but like the Dodgers didn't really have a closer. They gave Tanner Scott a ton of money. He didn't do well. Blake Treinen, his career kind of fell off a cliff compared to the season before. But like, I'm also watching like say what you want about Jeff Hoffman blowing the game 7. That dude was a dependable 8th and 9th inning guy the majority of the playoffs, to the point where it wasn't until game 7 that he had a blown save for the Toronto Blue Jays. That's why a closer does matter. And more specifically, that high leverage and arm matters. And now that we've gotten to the point with Diaz that I don't know if you agree or not, Rich, I think he's the best reliever the Mets have ever had. It's like him, Jesse Orozco, and I hate like Familia might be third, but like Diaz, the Mets. You want to talk about sentimental value of he should retire a New York Met? That's Edwin Diaz. The fact that he's still productive at this age, I think you back up the Brinks truck, and this is why you have Steve Cohen, because the only way he shouldn't be a Met is if you're outbid, and you shouldn't be outbid.
Yeah. You unequivocally have to bring Edwin Diaz back. And if Edwin Diaz opts out, which I expect that he will, and signs somewhere else, and you get the Martino tweet 5 minutes later, and it's like, well, David Stearns was never comfortable giving him more than 3 years. I'm going to throw my fucking computer off of the balcony onto the highway, because no, like, I'm sorry. That cannot be the explanation. That cannot be why he's not here. I don't really care what it is. I don't care. He is the only player, I think, on this team that I don't care if you overpay him in years or money to like a somewhat egregious degree. He has to be back. He is the best closer in baseball. There is no backup option to him. He is the linchpin of a bullpen that has to get rebuilt already. Like, rebuilding this bullpen is not going to be easy. That's with Diaz in it. You take him out and it is like scary hours in that bullpen. I don't care what it costs. I don't care how many years it is. There's no salary cap, at least in 2026. TBD after that. Your owner is $6 billion richer than he was when he bought the Mets. Give him the goddamn money.
Yeah.
And let's not mess around here. Okay. Like, there's no other option. And he proved he can do it in New York, and he proved he can do it in the playoffs here. And that is something, as we saw with Ryan Helsley, as we've seen with other relievers, you don't always know. You can get even if there was a great number 2 option in this free agency, you could bring him in. You have no idea if he could pitch here. Diaz can do it.
I'll just add one other personal note. My wife and I walked into our wedding reception to Narcos with my friends pretending to play trumpets. So there's a sentimental value to me going to Citi Field and hearing Narcos every time. It's either Narco, I forget if it's Narco or Narcos. Regardless, that Narcos. Song that Diaz comes into the game to. He's like, it's not even like an age thing too. He's 31. Like, every other option is in their mid 30s. You know, so at this point, it's him, or again, ironically, the person younger than him that's on the market by 4 months is Ryan Helsley. That's the one mulligan I give David Stearns for what ended up being a pretty disappointing deadline. Nobody could have foreseen that what happened to Ryan Helsley was going to happen to Ryan Helsley. This should be like a surefire. We got these 2 dominant guys at the end of our games, and I'm very fascinated to see what happens with Helsley, which will probably be he goes to like a last place team and is dominant, and then gets traded maybe back to the Mets. Who knows?
Maybe he'll. I could see him going to a good team. I think it's going to be not as big of a market.
It's like a 1-year deal. It's like a 1 year 15. You know.
Yeah, which should. Look, I don't think he would come back here. If you're telling me the Mets re-signed Diaz, I would throw Helsley like a 1-year deal just to be like, you can't be worse. Maybe you figured it out, but not as the closer. Like, yeah,
that's the thing. I think Helsley, his agent will be like, let's go find you a closer job somewhere to rebuild your value for a year. And then you go into next offseason off a year where you had 40 saves, you know?
Yeah. And I think he could probably get that. It might not be the best team to your point, but he can get that. Get traded again, reset his value.
Yeah.
All right. Question number 1. I don't think there's going to be any disagreement on this being the number 1 question of this Mets offseason is, will the Mets acquire an ace? You talked about it when we were talking about the World Series. It has been a running theme that has continued to come up as we've gone through all these different categories, all these different questions. They were so devoid of an ace this year up until Nolan McLean came up, which is insane because he was a rookie that they actively did not want to call up, and he winds up becoming the de facto ace for the last month and a half. But they can't go into the 2026 season with that same issue. And McLean as a number 2, I think, looks a lot better on paper than relying on him again entering a season where he'll technically still be a rookie, thanks to like 2-3 innings that he came short of that mark. But you want him to be the number 2, the number 3, and to have a more established arm in there that they did not have this year. And that's not, Manaea's better, and that's not, Sanga's better. That's going out and making the trade that you didn't make in the at the trade deadline, and that you specifically did not make last offseason. You didn't trade for Garrett Crochet. You didn't make any other moves in that department. And that's going to be the big question. Is it, one, are they going to do it at all? Or are they going to try to convince themselves that the bargain bin shopping thing, no, it still works. We just got really unlucky last year. Or is it, no, we're going to go out and we're going to get Tariq Skubal. We're going to get a Sandy Alcantara. We're going to get Joe Ryan or pitcher X who we don't even know is on the market. It's not going to be Paul Skeens. Don't get excited for Paul Skeens. That's the question that I'm going to have. I think that's the biggest key to this entire offseason and the success of the Mets in 2026. What do you feel about that?
2007, the Mets blew a 7-game division lead with 17 to play. And then they went and traded for Johan Santana. That was their answer to having one of these stretches at the end of the season. They just did not have that one guy to be a stopper of a losing streak. Because who knows, if they have an ace during that 4-13 stretch to end the 07 season, maybe they win the division, and then who knows what happened. The Colorado Rockies won the National League that year. I see a similar outcome here, and it's like, will the Mets acquire an ace is the question. I'm actually rather confident they will. I think this is just like going to happen. Again, I'm trying to hear David Stearns' words and take them seriously. He got away with it his first year. When I say got away with it, the bargain bin shopping for a rotation like went as good as it ever could have gone the first year with Severino and 1-year deal Quintana and 1-year deal Manaea, and what David Peterson was for most of last year for the first half of this year, right? Mm-hmm. And then this year, all of it backfired with. Now, I will say, Senga coming back and just like not being himself, and then the Manaea thing's weird this year because he missed half the season with an injury that, like, the oblique is just so difficult to stay in shape through. Right. So when you come back, your mechanics are off. You didn't really have a good chance, opportunity to ramp up. I am curious what a Manaea looks like come spring training, and if like he has a normal spring training, gets through his starts healthy, does he look like 70% of what he was 2 years ago? Then that's a solid number 3. Yeah, but that's it. He becomes your game 3 starter, because that's how you have to look at it, a game 3 starter. And then I think McLean can be your 1 if your 2 is really good, like a Joe Ryan, like an Alcantara, or I will one day learn how to say Sandy Alcantara.
I say it wrong every time. I think it's Alcantara, but I think I'm over pronouncing it.
Alcantara. Regardless, I think the pitcher for the Marlins. If you go get him, then that's a fine number 2. Like Joe Ryan is on my radar. I think Screwball's like the guy, and watching what he did both in the Cleveland series and then in the Seattle series showed me that's a guy that can perform in October too. And it would fall right in line for history to repeat itself for the Mets with a loaded farm system on paper to be able to trade for the most available pitcher on the market. I'm waiting for the official announcement that he is available on the market from the insiders and the newsbreakers. But if he is, I'm pretty confident that'll be a match made in heaven.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing there, and I think it's like he is very similar to Johan in terms of just like they're both lefties, they're both horses, they both come from the AL Central and have 1 year left on their deal, and the Mets just collapsed. The one difference is the odds that you're going to be able to trade and extend him like you did with Johan, almost impossible, because guess what? He's Scott Boras guy. Doesn't mean you don't.
Is that the calculation though? With 2027 just so up in the air?
No, I just think it's a wrinkle. I think
it's the difference. Yeah, it's the difference.
Yeah, it's you're not maybe willing to give up as much. The Tigers, in theory, how much can they expect to get? But they're also not going to not get something worthwhile here. So do they make the decision of like, all right, nobody wants to give up the haul because they're not going to be able to re-sign him, at least without him going to free agency first. We don't want these lesser deals because of that. We're just going to hang on to him, hope we win the World Series. And then if he walks, he walks. That's a possibility that is out of the Mets' control a little bit. So I think that's interesting. What are they going to be willing to give up? This is going to be something I want to talk to Joe DeMeo about, who's like the prospect czar on Thursday. Is what is a reasonable asking price? What would the Mets be willing to give up? I just think there's a lot of intrigue there. And, I'm not saying you don't do it. I think if they got Scooble, we're partying in the streets. But it's like less of a slam dunk, I think, just because there is a little bit of uncertainty of, well, what happens after 2026.
It is like again, you mentioned it. The day they made the Santana trade, they then got a 24-hour window to negotiate an extension, or else the deal didn't go through. They extended him. He was a Met for the next 6 or 7 years, and then like the rest was history. And I think the fact that you could end up like the Yankees in this sense of trading for Soto, making the World Series, losing, and then just one team just has to outbid you. It could be the Yankees. It could be the Dodgers. And that's just all it takes. I'm very fascinated to see how some teams, and that like includes the Yankees and the Dodgers, enter the Scooble sweepstakes knowing what's coming in 2027 with the lockout. And if it's just like, hey, let's go for broke here. If I'm the Yankees, I absolutely go for broke. And I don't think they'll have the prospect package to be the best offer. But like, by all means, go try to get Tariq Skubal. Like the Phillies are a team, and they actually have like 2 solid top 15 prospects that they could trade for Skubal. You know who actually would have the best package for Tariq Skubal, Rich? The Detroit Tigers. They have a loaded farm system. They probably should actually look to build around the core that they have. And this conversation, do you buy, by the way, the I'll say the Heyman reporting, but the Boris leaks that 4 for $80 is the last offer that the Tigers made to Skubal?
I have a hard time believing that when you look at the money they gave to Javier Baez a couple years ago. They're not, the Tigers are not the Yankees and the Mets, but the Tigers spend a decent amount of money for a team in their location. No, I think that's Boris shenanigans for sure. He does this. He has his people that he leaks things out to. It's all negotiating via the media. It's like the new way to do it. I don't buy that. I'm sure that they were well under what he wants, probably well under what he deserves. I think that's like an egregious offer. So I have a hard time buying that. I actually think it's interesting is that when you look at the Tigers farm system and you look at the fact that they are a team that's competitive, they've made the playoffs 2 years in a row. So like, they're not going to want to be non-competitive by trading Skubal. They're going to try to reload and retool. Their farm system is mostly position players. Most of their good young players are position players. So they're going to want pitching that is either major league ready or right at the cusp, which does make the Mets a really, really good fit. They're going to ask for McLean. You got to tell them no. Yeah. If I could get the extension with him, I'd think about it. It's not going to happen, so it's not worth the conversation. But if you're telling me, hey, I'm going to send them Tong and Sproat, and then like a Mauricio or something of that ilk, I think that could make sense for both teams. Is it enough for the Tigers? I don't know. It's slightly more than I want to give up in the pitching, but I think that's what makes a trade here, right? Like you're going to have to give up a little bit more than you want. I think something like that could make sense for both parties, and the Tigers can say, hey, we have a guy who could pitch in the major leagues right now in a Sproat, and Tong can probably come up in the next couple of months after, getting his stuff together at AAA, and we can stay competitive in the playoff hunt. I could see that. Yeah.
That's where I'm at too. Like two of the kids that, I mean, look, Sproat and Tong, and then, because I don't think this is going to be this isn't going to be the first Soto trade, and even if you want to compare it to like Michael King and
who's now available,
yes, but like what the Yankees gave up for Soto was indicative of a very clear, this is a rental package. And I think it's similar to what the Orioles gave up for Corbin Burns. I think it's going to be closer to that than it is any type of like gargantuan trade package that you'll have to give up for him. So look, he's obviously the ace, the prize of the offseason if he becomes available. If he's not, then you're in the Alcantara, Joe Ryan sweepstakes that unfortunately I think those could be great co-aces with Nolan McLean, but don't supplant McLean as your number one personally.
Yeah. And again, I kind of always think that there's somebody out there that we don't even know is available. Maybe that's becomes a situation. I can't even give you a guess as to who that is right now, but I think as we kind of dig in on all these different teams going into the offseason, maybe we can identify that potential guy. Right. Andrew.
Rich.
This was a big time first podcast for us. Went through a lot here. I am super excited and just interested in what's going to happen this offseason. I'm so happy to have you on the show. And I think we're going to wrap it up here. But just again, welcome to the Just Mets podcast for good. We are very happy to have you here. And then for everybody else, obviously, again, new shows every single Monday dropping at midnight. Again, those are free on YouTube and all the podcast apps. Every Thursday, we're going to have bonus pods coming out on our Patreon that has different interviews that we have. So sign up on our Patreon if you're interested in that. And then if we do have any major Mets breaking news, big signings that come in the offseason, Andrew and I are also going to go live on YouTube for those to do some emergency pods, whether that's right as it happens or maybe later on in the night if we got things going on. But we will be here for all of it. Until then, thank you for listening. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. And we will catch you later.